If you've tried to follow the American right lately, you've probably noticed it looks less like a political movement and more like a family screaming at each other across a Thanksgiving table. Ben Shapiro is calling Tucker Carlson a coward.
The main agent in that normalization is Tucker Carlson, who is an intellectual coward, a dishonest interlocutor, and a terrible friend.
A major conservative think tank just had a complete staff mutiny and meltdown a few months ago.
2 more Heritage Foundation board members have resigned after fallout from Heritage President Kevin Roberts' defense of Tucker Carlson.
Tucker Carlson is interviewing extremely right-wing people like Nick Fuentes.
Why aren't people married?
Well, I mean, honestly, it's the women.
The president has disowned congresspeople like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Rand Paul and Thomas Massey.
I don't know what happened to Marjorie. She's a nice woman, but I don't know what happened. She's lost her way, I think.
And people are throwing all these words around like groiper and fusionist and restrainer and post-liberal, and they're acting like everybody is just supposed to know what they mean. But not everybody does know what they mean, and the truth is that this is actually a very complicated situation. Nobody is explaining the basics, so we're going to start from zero. We're going to assume that you know absolutely nothing at all about the conservative movement. By the end, you're going to understand this split going on in the conservative movement, and you're probably going to understand it better than most full-time political junkies. So here's the one thing I want you to hold on to before we even begin. The American right was never a single movement. It was actually 2 very different movements, and those 2 movements teamed up against a common enemy. But that enemy is gone now, and the right is kind of collapsing in on itself. It's not exactly failing, and the conservative movement is still very, very strong and active in America, but things are beginning to go downhill. The marriage between these 2 sides of the movement is falling apart in real time. That's what we're living through. That's what we're watching. Again, I'm going to explain all of this today. If you haven't already subscribed and liked this video and turned on notifications, please go ahead and do so. I cannot tell you how much it helps the channel. It pushes it out to even more people. Also, if you have any comments, please drop them down below in the comment section. I would love to hear what you think. Without further ado, let's get into it. So these 2 groups are conservatives and libertarians, and those words get thrown around as insults. They usually mean nothing by the time they reach you. People just don't know what they mean. So let's define them clearly. Once you see the difference, all of the fights in the conservative movement are going to start making sense. Let's start with the conservative. The conservative, it cares about tradition. They care about family, they care about faith and community. They care about the old rules that people have lived by for a long time. You can hear it in the name. They want to conserve something from the past. And the conservatives' basic attitude is simple. They believe that these things exist for a reason: family, faith, country, freedom. The conservatives' basic attitude is that there are a lot of institutions left over from the past, things like church, and the importance of family, and the importance of the nuclear family in particular, and the institution of marriage is between one man and one woman, and similar things like that. And they say that those things exist for a reason, and so we need to be extremely, extremely hesitant to tear them down. As G.K. Chesterton famously said, if you don't know what a wall is there for, don't tear it down. Now, there's one word that unlocks the conservative brain, and that word is virtue. Virtue just means being a good person. It means being honest. It means being disciplined, and it means being decent. The conservative believes something a little dark about people, and it's something that comes from their Christian heritage. They believe that people are not automatically good, that if left totally alone, people tend to be selfish and be lazy and make a mess and commit crimes. So a good society needs things that push people to be better. Those things are the church, the family, the state, and the rule of law. So here's the conservatives' bottom line. Freedom is good. All conservatives, as a rule, believe in freedom. But freedom without virtue, freedom without goodness and restraint turns into chaos. A country where everybody just does whatever they want will fall apart completely. So the conservative think society, and sometimes even the government, has a job to do in restraining people's depraved passions and keeping them in check. The libertarian, which is on the other side of the spectrum, believes something completely different. The libertarian has one singular core rule, and it's that you own yourself and everybody should leave you alone as long as you're not hurting or harming other people. That's it. That's literally the whole thing. They believe that you own your body, and they believe that you own your stuff, and they believe that nobody, and especially the government, has any right to boss you around unless you're harming somebody else, in which case they have an obligation to step in. So watch what happens when you ask the libertarian about how other people live. He shrugs. He doesn't really care. Do you want to do something with your life that other people find weird or distasteful? It's frankly none of his business. And it's not the government's business either. He's not saying it's a good idea. In fact, he may tell you that you shouldn't do whatever it is. He's just saying it's not the government's job to run your life. It's not the church's job to run your life. It's not your parents' job to run your life, unless, of course, you're a minor. But it's no one's job to run your life but you, and you get to make decisions about that. Now, here's the single most important thing in this entire video. So slow down for 10 seconds. On money, with taxes and regulations and the size of the government, the conservative and the libertarian, they basically agree. Both of them want lower taxes. Both of them, most of the time, want a smaller government. And they shake hands and they're happy on those things. But on morals, like should the government push people to be good, they split. The conservative says yes, a little. The libertarian says no, leave people alone. And they also do split on some other issues like drugs and foreign policy, and that's things we'll get into later. But first, I want to talk about how these two groups of people, the conservatives and the libertarians, actually became friends. Because here's the thing, morality is actually really, really important for a society. It's the foundational bedrock of how a society is built. So if you go around saying one thing about morality and somebody else goes around saying another thing about morality, and those two things are fundamentally opposed, then you kind of have a problem, and those two people can't agree. Unless there's a bigger enemy. And in the late 20th century, conservatives and libertarians had just that. They had communism as a shared enemy. So let me give you a quick history, and this will be super simple. For most of the last century, the scariest thing in the world was a country called the Soviet Union. Basically, Russia and the nations it controlled, which back then were nations like Ukraine and Czechoslovakia. Of course, those nations are independent now, but in the 20th century, those were all controlled, and they all flew the same flag of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union ran a system called communism, where the government controls almost everything and crushes business, freedom, and religion. The giant standoff between them and us, the capitalist West, lasted for decades, and it had a name. It was called the Cold War. Now, think about it. Communism threatened everything that both the conservatives and the libertarians loved. It threatened the libertarians' freedom and free markets, and it threatened the conservatives' God, family, and traditions. And when there's a wolf at the door, the two people inside the house have to stop arguing and hold that door shut together. They have to address the threat. So that's exactly what happened. The two groups teamed up. Smart people gave the team up a fancy name, and you don't have to call it this, but they called it fusionism, just meaning the fusion, the joining of the two groups. And the hero of this team up was none other than the conservative hero, President Ronald Reagan. And this is one reason why Ronald Reagan is so popular with the right wing in the American political sphere. It's because he united these two groups and formed an extremely powerful coalition. He bundled all of it together in the 1980s, free markets, traditional values, and crushing communism. He bundled it all into one package, and it worked. The Soviet Union was successfully beaten and collapsed in 1991. The good guys won. But that victory creates a problem that nobody wanted to say out loud for a very long time. If the whole reason those two very different political groups were teamed up was a shared enemy, what happens to the team when that enemy is gone? All right, so now we need to talk about personalities. We need to talk about people that are important in the conservative and libertarian world. And perhaps the most relevant and important person we could talk about is Ron Paul. So after communism fell, the team just kind of drifted, the whole right wing in American politics. It started becoming boring, uninteresting, and they didn't really have much to fight for. Then came the Iraq War. In the 2000s, the leaders of the Republican Party were really into using the American military all over the world. They wanted to invade countries, they wanted to build nations, they wanted to change regimes, and they wanted to start huge wars in the Middle East, plus a lot of spying on people back home after 9/11 with things like the Patriot Act. And for years, if you're a Republican, you basically weren't allowed to question any of that. Now, regardless of what you think about those policy positions, that was literally just the case. And one guy eventually started questioning it. That guy was a libertarian congressman named Ron Paul. He ran for president in 2008 and 2012, and he started saying things that literally nobody else was saying. He wanted to stop the endless wars. He wanted to bring the troops home. He wanted to stop the spying from the Patriot Act. He wanted to shrink the government for real. He didn't win, obviously. He never became president, but he lit a fire, especially with young guys online, and that's a lot of what we're seeing with the new right today. Here's the key. The stuff that Ron Paul was saying back in 2008 is the exact same wave of populism that Donald Trump would later ride to the White House in 2016. So why does this matter for what you're seeing in the modern political sphere? Because the kind of new right Republicans that are splintering off from traditional Republicans today, people like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Megyn Kelly, Thomas Massie, Marjorie Taylor Greene, they're coming out of this libertarian tradition from Ron Paul. They're part of the anti-war, anti-establishment, leave me alone, don't trust the experts crowd. That's the libertarian half of the old team breaking loose and going full populist, okay? So if you've always felt like these people seem kind of libertarian, you're actually right. That's exactly what they are. For example, Thomas Massie literally calls himself a Ron Paul Republican, and Ron Paul's son is now one of the most influential libertarians in Congress, Rand Paul. So this continued for a while, and then, of course, Donald Trump entered the scene in 2016, and this is a gigantic moment. Trump blew the whole team up. He attacked the Iraq war from the right. He trashed the party's own leaders. He questioned free trade to some extent. He's obviously a New York businessman who's extremely capitalist, but he did question free trade a little bit, and he won anyway, because he was able to unite these two sides of the coalition again. He was able to appease the libertarian wing and appease the conservative wing and bring them back together. And in this sense, he's sort of like a reincarnation of Ronald Reagan. So all of that proved that the old formula wasn't required anymore. You didn't have to be an establishment Republican, and he kind of just brought the old coalition back together. So after Donald Trump won in 2016, the party kind of looked like a bunch of establishment conservatives who were a lot more populist than they used to be, and they were starting to lean further to the right, become more radical in some senses. And then, of course, you have the libertarian wing, which is still resisting war, resisting the Patriot Act, and they're following Ron Paul and eventually his son, Rand Paul. So that's kind of the situation when Trump won in 2016. But it didn't really last long because, as it turns out, the libertarians and the conservatives, we don't have a common enemy anymore, or we should have a common enemy, that's the left, but we're having a really hard time uniting around it. So they started to split again. And on one side, you have the populist anti-war wing. That's your Tucker, Candace, Megyn, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Massie. They've got the leave me alone instincts. They're sick of foreign wars. They're sick of the surveillance state. They're sick of being told to trust the experts. And they're anti-establishment down to the bone. But there's also a second group now, and this is the one that trips people up. There are some folks on the new right who want to break from libertarianism in the opposite direction. They actually want to use government power more, not less, to protect the country and traditional values. Think tariffs, think family policy, think a more muscular government. This is the wing that the vice president, J.D. Vance, leans toward. So Tucker and Vance actually aren't on the same team, even though they've got the same enemies and they're very, very similar. Another good example of the very libertarian wing of the movement would be Joe Rogan, who's extremely libertarian. He believes in just leaving people alone no matter what, as opposed to someone like Nick Fuentes, who actually believes that the government should get very involved in the economy. He doesn't really believe in free trade. And frankly, neither does Tucker and some of the others. They believe, but they're a lot closer to free trade than someone like Nick Fuentes. So that's kind of the glue now on the libertarian side. They're both uniting to fight against what they see as the establishment Republicans, which would be people like Ben Shapiro and Ted Cruz and Mark Levin and others. Again, they don't really agree on what they're for. They disagree on what they're against. The old Republican establishment, the war guys, and the Reagan and Bush crowd. Okay, so all of this has exploded, especially in the last year. Things have been absolutely insane for the right. So I'm going to go through the major flashpoints of why everything is just blowing up online now and why the libertarian and the conservative wing are really, really fighting. So flashpoint number one is Charlie Kirk's assassination. Charlie ran the biggest young conservative group in the country. He was without a doubt the leader of the conservative movement. My hat literally says "Make America Charlie Kirk." Okay, that guy was amazing. I supported him fully. He ran Turning Point USA. He was the glue that held the movement together. He was able to somewhat keep the libertarians and the conservatives from fighting and convince them we had a common enemy in the left. But he was assassinated on September 10th, 2025 by Tyler Robinson. Within months, with the glue totally gone, the whole movement just caught fire. The second flashpoint would be Tucker interviewing Nick Fuentes. This is a huge one. So Fuentes is a young online streamer. He's openly anti-Semitic. He's pro-Nazi. He's pro-Stalin. For years, nobody respectable would touch him, okay? He was banned from YouTube, banned from, I believe, Facebook. He's on a national no-fly list. He's not even allowed to fly anywhere. He's definitely on he's just extremely fringe, right? Then Tucker Carlson decided to sit him down for a very long, very friendly interview. He didn't throw him any hard questions. He didn't ask him about his support for Hitler or Mussolini or Stalin. He just sat him down and interviewed him like he was somebody that conservatives should start accepting. And some people on the right, like Ben Shapiro, just absolutely lost it. He called Tucker an intellectual coward and the most virulent super spreader of vile ideas in America. His whole point was that we need to draw boundaries around who is accepted in the conservative movement and who is not accepted in the conservative movement, and Nick Fuentes does not belong in it. He doesn't believe that it's canceling somebody to say that some ideas are over the line. And that interview started splitting the media right literally down the middle. Everybody started fighting over this. Now, regardless of what you think about it, you have to agree that what Tucker did was extremely incendiary, and I think it was designed to be that way. Flashpoint number 3 has to do with the Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative think tank that literally melted down in the middle of all this chaos. It's a big, famous think tank, right? It's in Washington. And at some point, the president of the think tank decided to defend Tucker's interview with Nick Fuentes, and the staff just absolutely revolted. Okay, people literally started quitting and walking out the door. And the president had to issue a groveling apology. Again, this is not the president of the United States. This is the president of the Heritage Foundation. And an actual institution, which was an important institution, granted, kind of got torn apart over this. Now, flashpoint number 4 is it's got to be the most said word on the internet right now, and that would be Israel. So underneath the whole anti-Semitism fight is an actual policy split. Again, regardless of whether you think Tucker and Candace and Massey and others are anti-Semitic, there is an actual policy disagreement underneath all of the claims about Israel. I've made my position on that very clear many times. I'm not going to get into that right now. My purpose is just to explain what's going on. So the populist wing, which is again Tucker, Candace, Massey, they want America to stop funding foreign wars. That includes automatic support for Israel. Okay, they really do not like Israel. The old guard, which would be Shapiro, Ted Cruz, Mark Levin, Michael Knowles, and others like that, they are rock solid pro-Israel. And this has become the test. Are you with the establishment or are you against them? It's gotten so intense that, things just blew up at AmFest 2025. Ben Shapiro lost a lot of his audience to this. And Tucker straight up left the Republican Party, as did Nick Fuentes and Candace Owens. Thomas Massey lost his primary over this. All sorts of just crazy things going on. Everybody's fighting. The president is disowning congresspeople and governors left and right. It's crazy, right? Well, here comes the final flashpoint. It's kind of the perfect little snapshot of everything. A second ago, I mentioned that Thomas Massey lost his primary over this issue. Well, in 2026, Trump went all out to destroy Massey. Massey is in his own party. He's a Republican, but Massey has a consistent record of voting against literally everything Trump tries to get through Congress. And that's because he disagrees with him on issues like foreign policy. He even showed up to campaign against him multiple times because Massey bucked him on the Iran war. He refused to vote for the big, beautiful bill. And he also insisted that Trump had something criminal to do with Epstein. He had committed some sort of criminal act, and the Epstein files needed to be released. Well, it turned into the most expensive House primary in American history, flooded with pro-Israel and anti-Israel money, with people like Rand Paul and Marjorie Taylor Greene and other dissidents in the House, even Democrats like Ro Khanna, very radical Democrats, out there campaigning to try to save him. That one race is kind of the whole Civil War in miniature. Trump backed his opponent, Ed Gallery, who is a more pro-Trump, pro-establishment conservative, and the Libertarian wing came out in full force for Thomas Massey. And what happened was the Trump machine won, because an endorsement from Donald Trump, who's kind of the kingmaker in the Republican Party, is everything if you want to succeed in politics right now. And he didn't get that endorsement. So Thomas Massey lost his primary to Ed Gallery, and it wasn't even close. It was a landslide victory for Ed. And of course, with any political situation, we're looking at the future. We're looking at, we want to hold the government for as long as possible. We want to keep power, and we want to make sure our policies are enacted, whether you're on the left or the right. This is always true. So we're looking ahead to 2028, and we're saying, J.D. Vance is probably next in line for the presidency. It's going to be him or Marco Rubio, and personally, I think J.D. Vance has this in the bag. He's trying to hold both wings of the party together, the libertarian and the conservative wing. He's trying to do it the way Trump did. He's trying to bring together the same coalition, the anti-war populists and the pro-Israel hawks. Whether you think that'll succeed or not, I don't know. I can't see into the future. I think it's going to be very difficult to do because in general, as a general rule, it's very, you can't steal some other politician's coalition. You have to form your own coalition made up of your own people. But it looks like he's going to try to do it anyways, even though it's getting very hard for him. When he refused to smack down an anti-Semitic question at a college event not too long ago, and he called all the infighting stupid, the Republican establishment hawks just absolutely turned on him, lost their minds. But the populist wing kind of saw him as their guy. They're like, wait, this guy's great. So now it's being framed, at least online. The polls are showing different things, but at least online it's being framed as Marco Rubio, who's the establishment war hawk Republican, versus J.D. Vance, who's this more populist libertarian voice. Whoever wins that fight is going to decide who owns the movement and who is the new kingmaker. All right, so having explained all of that, let's put it all together clean and simple. The right was always two groups. There were the tradition people and there were the freedom people, and they were taped together by one shared enemy. That enemy was communism. Ronald Reagan made the team up work, and he won the Cold War. Then the enemy vanished, and the tape started peeling. Ron Paul woke the anti-war, anti-establishment side back up. He raised it from the dead. Trump supercharged it. He blew up all the old rules. He made it possible to question anything in the Republican Party on both sides. And now, with no common enemy left, the pieces are kind of turning on each other. The Tucker and Massey populists versus the old war establishment, Shapiro and Levin and Cruz and others. And also against the big government national conservatives, the NatCons. And kind of the spot where the sparks are actually flying, where the tensions are actually meeting, is Israel and endless wars and all these terms you're hearing getting thrown around on the internet today. So I'll leave you with the tension in this. The populist wing has a legitimate grievance, okay? The old, war establishment of the Republican Party, they had problems, okay? They wanted to get involved sometimes where they shouldn't have gotten involved. And they called anyone who disagreed with that a traitor, okay? So that's not paranoia, it's literally just history. But the same wing also has a very ugly problem it can't ignore. The majority, I would say, and again, you can make your own judgment on this, but I would say the majority of that libertarian wing has no principle, and they don't have real policy positions. It's just anti-Semitism, it's absolutely unhinged, uncontrolled conspiracy theories, and a completely unfounded automatic distrust of everything the government does, just, powering the entire movement. So guys like Ben Shapiro are betting the soul of the conservative movement on drawing a very hard line against those more fringe radicals. Both of those things are true at the same time, which leaves one giant question hanging over all of it. Now that the big enemy is, reportedly gone, of course, communism is experiencing a rise in popularity in the United States, but now that the Soviet Union specifically is gone, what is the right actually for? Nobody has really answered that yet, and there are a lot of competing opinions, but the next couple of years are going to decide that very thing. You now understand this better than basically everyone in your comment section. I'll see you in the next one.